Welcome to episode 56 of the Time Talks podcast, part of the Channel Zero Network. This month I had the honor to speak to my good friend Carla Joy Bergman. Carla is a joyarchist, a weaver, a healer, listener, writer, author, and revolutionary. In this episode we talk about her latest book, Trust Kids, Stories on Youth Autonomy and Confronting Adult Supremacy, which is an amazing book. I also have a chapter in this book, and I'm grateful Carla reached out to me about contributing. In this episode, Carla discusses youth autonomy, adult supremacy, trust and friendship, the purple thistle, and intergenerational solidarity. Thank you to Awareness for the music, and here's a brief jingle from a fellow Channel Zero Network member.
I know the kind of pain you're feeling, Alex. I once had it myself.
You some kind of doctor?
No, Alex. I am Magneto, and I have come to offer you sanctuary.
Hello, this is our jingle for our podcast, The Grounded Futures Show.
This is the show where we discuss topics ranging from climate change to identity to how youth can gain new skills to thrive amid current and ongoing disasters that we are collectively facing. We are your hosts, one Gen Z Liam and one Gen X Carla. And we think we all deserve to thrive now and not in some distant utopian future.
Yeah, but that's in the future. Oh, I hate the future.
Yeah, we're with Bolin. Grounded Futures is a larger project, so check that out over at groundedfutures.com.
So my first question was, if you can give some moments in your early life where you started questioning these dominant narratives of what you usually refer to as empire, but to break that down of capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist, childist patriarchy.
Start with the hard question. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I love coming into the Time Talks portal. Time listening, it should be called. Oh, it's such a big question. I was thinking that maybe I would, because it will help me not go off on a big, long tangent, maybe keep it around the topic of adult supremacy and kids, maybe a little bit, if that's okay. But yeah, I think it's so good it's such a honor to be asked these questions because you get to play with time a bit. And it's always interesting of how we affect the past with these reflections. But I definitely was a kid who right away didn't like injustice in the way, and especially socially speaking. So I was, I think in my kindergarten, or probably even actually in church, like even early on, like even before school, at Sunday school, I was in trouble for always talking back. And the talking back was usually because somebody was not being treated well. Like usually another kid was being bullied by the adult. And it gets visceral. Like I really remember always being that person who stood up for the kid being bullied by an adult, and including in my home. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings with like quite a large age difference with some of them. So, that's where that kind of talk back started. And then with my parents as well. And it played out all through school. Like before I dropped out, I was either like kind of the teacher's favorite or the one who they sent to the office every single day, because it was based on that. That was the bar. Like, are you treating the young people in the room with respect? Then I'm going to treat you with respect back. Like you get to set the tone. And so if a teacher like was a bully and was disrespectful, I was their thorn in their side. And to the point where I even had one teacher where I'd walk in and he'd be like, Carla, out. I'm like, I didn't even do anything. He's like, but I know you're going to, like in the hall. Like I was, the quintessential kid in the hall. And it was like our element, our what is it called? Middle school or whatever. It was all like this modern school that had all glasses. So if you're a kid in the hall, you could see in. And so that's why I was always kicked to the office, because I just continued being a problem in the hall. So, I just talked back really like right away. And that included like between kids too. Like I was that kid who got in between two kids fighting, or vice brothers were fighting. I got in between them. So it's just like, I don't remember a starting point. And it just really comes down to, and maybe it's empathy or compassion or who knows what it is, but I really couldn't stand by when an injustice was taking place. So that just continued to grow as I like aged and noticed that happening writ large. And it really publicly, it started like the kind of anti-nuclear stuff with like the Sandinista stuff, like in the late 70s, early 80s. And that's where I really started to get involved in going to protests and marches and being aware. And like I was a punk kid, like joined the punk scene, and it just slowly grew. And it was almost external in a lot of ways, that kind of stuff. And it really wasn't until I became a parent. And I always say that Zach was born the same year the Zapatistas did their thing. So I don't know, they're both important. And I think also Rwanda happened around that time too. That genocide was also really impactful. And I spent a good chunk of my academic time majoring in genocide studies. So I don't really want to minimize that because it's really important. And they all kind of work together. And so having a kid who is neurodifferent and watching his way of being in the world be squashed from institutions and other adults, including close to us adults, just broke me open in a new way. And to the point where I even had to leave university because doing that genocide study stuff and trying to like work at that level of politics was so disconnected from my community and from like trying to figure out how to work to undo adult supremacy, how to like support my kid, but all kids maybe have more thriving in their life. And I started getting involved in alternatives to education and alternatives to school and other ways of connecting that solidarity.
Nice.
Sorry, that was all over the place, but I was trying to keep it like.
No, that was good. And you were involved in kind of like the punk scene in the 80s in Vancouver. And did that have any like influence on like collectivity or organizing, or was that just, it was probably something you were drawn to, but then something like you learned from and helped grow as well?
Yeah. Well, so I was in the punk scene in Victoria, which is like the island, the capital of like the so-called, colonial province that I'm in, British Columbia. And the punk scene there was actually pretty awesome. Some great bands came out of there, like No Means No and Dayglow Abortions and many others. I think the thing that like got seeded there was I was about 18 or just turned 19, and the only bar that the bands could play at, and we got to go for free to watch them, or really low price, burnt down, and No Means No's equipment was part of that fire, which was really distressing. And my brother lived in a really cool big collective house that I spent a lot of time at, so I asked them if I could start running events there for punk bands, and that all the proceeds at the door would go to the getting gear back for No Means No and whatever else, and connecting it to other struggles in the city and stuff. And so I think like that kind of organizing a social space that brought people together around shared ideas and then branching out solidarity really did get seeded by this like disaster that happened. And that's something that's carried through my life, is more that. And then in terms of like mutual aid or collectivity or whatever, I grew up on a military base the first 12 years of my life or something. And that kind of like ethos of the soldier of like no one left behind or whatever played out in this like beautiful way in the neighborhood. Like everyone took care of everyone else's kids. No one like, and I doubt it's like this at all anymore. But, I always joke that everything I learned about mutual aid, solidarity, and like reciprocity and like the true ethos behind collectivity or anarchism, I learned on the army base. So yeah, it's just something that was, everyone took care of everyone, everything for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And you write about a lot of that in your pamphlet on mutual aid. And that was also in the Building Power While the Lights Are Out book, edited by Jimmy Dunson.
Yeah, and you're in that book too.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Grateful to be in that. Thank you. Well, my next question is, in Joyful Militancy, you and Nick Montgomery interviewed many people about autonomy, autonomous communities, finding ways to thrive, and playing with what joy means, which doesn't always mean happy. And there were so many threads in this book with trust and youth autonomy, with stories of the purple thistle. I was wondering if you can talk about these works, how these kind of work together and feed each other, and what you further weaved into your newest book, Trust Kids.
Oh, thank you. That's an awesome question. Yeah, they're so connected. Like it's interesting because I also made a film about the purple thistle, and trust was like at the center of it. Nick actually was showing that film to his class the other day, and he texted me, goes, trust and friendship, exclamation mark. It was really sweet because it's like, yeah, like those are kind of the notions or the themes that animate the work. That, like, my eldest Zach said, that joy is something that I'm aspiring to to embody more and to have more in my life. Like, I definitely, it escapes me a lot, but he's like, trust is something that, that animates your life, like how you work with people, how you like show up. And I think that comes back to that kid thing. Like, I really noticed when I wasn't trusted, or, to put it in a maybe less abstract way, I really notice when people don't believe me, right? Whether it's my experience or my perspective or my ideas. So yeah, trust is, like, to me, the foundation of any good community, or any potential for a community to thrive and do well by each other. Is that, this kind of baseline trust for each other is like what we talk about in joyful militancy, is really important as a common notion, something that is like an ethical emergence that has to be at play for things to go well. And we put it together with the idea of responsibility, because trust can't be a demand and it can't be rigid, and it can't be this thing that is static. It's always emerging and fluid, and alongside that is a responsibility for each other, for how we show up, and breaking that word apart, like thinking about the ability to respond. So, like, thinking about, like, bringing in intersectionality around disability justice, or children, or folks who can't show up at we can't have a flat, like a bar of how you must show up or whatever. It has to be nuanced. And
I like no assholism.
Yeah.
You all had with Thistle.
Yeah, that was a Matt Hearnism. That's it was very good. It was on the door. It's the only rule. Oh, and no sleeping there, but that was something else. But
Oh yeah. So I wanted to look, more at the roots of Trust Kids. And one thing I found when researching the Purple Thistle, and this was started in 2001, and it was shared in a yellow building in East Vancouver. Is that right?
yeah, chartreuse, actually, Chris.
Oh, okay.
Parisian, actually, it was Parisian green, is what I was told.
I don't have my color wheel key out. And on the Purple Thistle blog in 2014, you wrote an entry called "Trust Each Other So We Can Be Fearless." And I'd like to read part of this entry and have you respond and talk a little bit about it in the Thistle. And you wrote, quote, "Giving folks, and especially young folks, the trust up front is a terrific and important place to start. In fact, I think it's the most important foundation for a strong and caring community. I am not talking about the kind of trust you would build over time in your long-term core relationships, but something more in line with care and respect, like friendship. I think without a starting place of trust, our foundations are weak, and then all kinds of problems can grow from that lack of trust in each other. In contrast, when I'm trusted, I do better. I'm going to step up and do well by that trust. So I think starting with something simple like, I trust that the folks who I am working with will do their best is a terrific place to begin to rethink our practices and the ways we treat each other." And this just seemed like such a seed of what Trust Kids bloomed out of.
Wow, thanks for reading that and finding that. Yeah, it was actually, we had a broadsheet, like one of those really old analog, massive, beautiful, designed by Joy Arkan at the Thistle. And so every once in a while, I'd write a little piece for the cover. It was just something, I'm just going to, if people have read Joyful Militancy, or if you haven't, like Kian Cham, we interviewed him for the book, and we ended up putting his entire interview in the book because he was a kid who showed up at the Thistle and worked there and was part of it project for a really long time. And he really talks about trust in a really neat way and how it played out the Thistle. And so I just really recommend that, but because it had a lot of, I want to bring up that because it really influenced Trust Kids, and I think the way that it flowed out, because I mean, you can have this kind of, I don't know, ethical way of being in the world, but you don't always get it reflected back to you, and you don't know if it's actually landing. And Kian's words about, like, like he said, like, it was just wild. Like, you just trusted me, like you and the other adult, like you just like, I was there for like a week and I got keys. And then like, I was there for a month and then I became like the anchor of the garden project and was given this budget and told like I could have, he has this quote where he's like, I could have ran off with all the money of it. Like, I didn't, because you guys trusted me. Like, it's like this weird dynamic, like you just did this thing. And yeah, it was just this interesting thing that was in practice at the Thistle because of the intersections of difference of folks who were involved that came from all kinds of different backgrounds, class, race, genders, all of it, just busted it all, disability, abilities. I think like how that connected to the book is that doing that work at the Thistle publicly and having folks in other kind of movements not really get it. Like, there was this disconnect around youth oppression. They thought it was really great what we were doing at the Thistle, but they kind of pushed it to the side, and to the point where some organizers would reach out to say that they wanted to come and give a workshop to the youth on how to run a space. And it would just like, my brain would be like, what are you even like, what? Like you, I mean, you never got to experience, but this was really dynamic. Like, it was all ages, and all kinds of art projects happened there. Like they knew how to run a space quite beautifully, actually. And they made the same kind of mistakes that any age group. It was just this wild ageism, right? Of this idea that kids, no matter, even though they're doing it, they still need to be taught, right? And then I just wasn't, I didn't notice that. It's starting to bust open more, but it's still like often left off of the list of oppressions it's just a given, right? Like, kids are these things over here. And so that's when I started using the phrase solidarity begins at home, because I like they go together. Like, how kids are treated out in public is this thing's happening, but it's all starting at home. And what was happening is I was noticing a lot of the most radical organizers who got platformed and held up didn't think about kid oppression, and a lot of them are parents. And I just was curious about like that cutoff. Like, how do you reckon with that? How do you reckon with your own adult supremacy? And so
I think you explained it, really good, of just like trust and how these adults who are even like in quote solidarity are coming in and still reinforcing that childism.
Right. I guess the thing is that it's a part of the conversation of undoing all oppressions or collective liberation that gets sort of put to the side in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of practical reasons why, because of capitalism, people are struck with so many decisions to make around schooling and not schooling, and like making sure their kids have some skills for life and all these things. And so part of how that work at the Thistle influenced the book, and then my home life influenced the book, and thinking about solidarity in a larger sense was like, how can I have this conversation? How can this conversation break through some of these barriers that are from empire, that are bigger than us? And one of those ways was to really center this ocean of confronting adult supremacy, because it is often this conversation gets siloed in youth liberation, and just like women's liberation was, it got siloed, and it took some really powerful folks like bell hooks to go, wait a second, this is about patriarchy. We want collective liberation, actually, and we need to like look at patriarchy and invite people to this conversation who are like wielding the patriarchy. And right, so it's kind of similar what was influencing me, and bell hooks really influenced me because she actually centered children as a site of oppression that prevented collective liberation. So yeah, all of that is to say that trust is where it all begins, but solidarity is a big part of that. And how can we grapple with our own, including my own? Like, I'm still grappling with my own adult supremacy and how I deal with it. So it's
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think like one other way that this ties in with Trust Kids and Purple Thistle is your theme through your work is about questioning institutions and also deprofessionalism. And one thing that was really cool is some of the blog entries when the Thistle was closing was it was written in there that the Thistle was never meant to be an institution, and that you all had written this had shown us that perhaps we're no longer needed in the way we were in the past and have pretty much done our time. And you all write, everything does end. And to be honest, we wish more places would end when it's time. But unfortunately, we live in a system that values longevity over thriving. And that ain't us. And I thought that was really powerful. And kind of just that, that capitalism thing of having to grind. And then this other side that you all brought in of like, we're not going to be an institution. We're going to trust and listen and do what we need to do to move on from there. I was wondering if you could speak on that experience.
Yeah, thank you. Closing the Thistle was probably, in terms of community work and organizing and accountability to others, was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It was not done in silo. It took a lot of conversations. I met with every single collective member one-on-one first. Every person who was ever involved in the Thistle had like including Matt, who had been gone for a couple of years. I met with him and he was one of the first people I told. And it was just really important to me to change the discourse a bit about closing and ending, because, another level of gentrification, it was happening in Vancouver and continues to happen. The closing of spaces was connected to that. The cutting off funding to spaces was definitely a big part of that. And that was a part of the story at the Thistle too. But there was also these other stories. And I think we can as activists and organizers and people who are really pissed off at the world can just keep in the one narrative. And I think that it didn't do it justice. It was like, it was going to leave behind the beauty that was happening at the Thistle, which was always a response to the kids in the neighborhood at the time and what they needed. Like, it always was based on that. Like, it was always like, that was the story. So what else is going on? Let's step back and look at all the other parts. And one of the biggest things that was going on was a lot of former people involved at the Thistle were opening their own spaces, which is like amazing, right? Like, that were based on their predilections and their community's needs, and the little bit of funding that was left at that time in the for spaces was going to the Thistle because we had the reputation and we had the support. So it was like, I think we talked about calling it the Quakers ethos of like, sometimes you just got to lay it down, like, get out of the way. And that was also at the like core of the Thistle, and the core of how I parent and the core of how I work with people is sometimes it's actually about getting out of the way. Like, yes, guidance is important. Yes, mentorship is important, but sometimes you just got to like go away, like just let people experiment and do their thing. So it was really, I think, an important way to end. It did change discourses. I had people from we had run social spaces summits through what we called the Thistle Institute, and people came from all over who ran social spaces. So we had this network, and a lot of those spaces reached out and were really grateful for that new framing, because I think we can just replicate the systems that we're trying to fight against when we just keep it really linear, one story, just about anger, just about victim. Like, there's always so much more going on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And solidarity begins at home. One of your chapters that you wrote in Trust Kids, you really talk about how there's a lot of these normalized social fractures in our community, and that they chip away at our relationships and cause rifts and social bonds. And that was just really powerful. One of the things you wrote was, the roots are often still there, deep in the ground, but there's a disconnect, or more precisely, there are institutions built on top of the buried social ways of being in relationship that cut us off from our more autonomous and communal ways of being together. And children spend a great deal of their lives locked away in one of these institutions. I thought that was really powerful. And you kind of explaining that, like, those roots are already there. They just are disconnected. And I was wondering if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah,
Stephen.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like why, I think how I could connect it maybe to the work or the book is like why I focus on autonomy over youth liberation, or is like that autonomy away from institutions. And because so much of like how empire, and whether it's the state or capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, all of it continues to subjugate us all in different uneven ways, but still, it's still going on, is that we're so reliant on institutions. how we raise our kids, how they get educated, how we grow our food, what we eat, how like everything has been sort of taken away from us, and these forms of life are removed. And there's many stories of the reclaiming of that. There's a beautiful upgrowths of autonomy and flowering and blooming, and they don't always last though. And there's lots of reasons why they don't last, because because the state comes crashing down and capitalism doesn't like it. But also I think it's because a lot of them still send their kids to school, or like I think that's one of the like strongest colonial holds still, is that kids still need to be educated away from community. And I think and Toby goes into this really well in the book, Toby Rollo, about how like if we don't actually deal with childism and the oppression of children, everything we do gets cut off in one generation, because everything gets replicated again through these systems of control, through the various institutions. And I also want to say all this, that I tend to stay out of the school, not school conversation a lot. And I decentered it in this book on purpose, because I think it's one of the ways that this conversation gets marginalized around children immediately, because it gets people in their camps instantly. Like, oh, it's so privileged to unschool your kids. It's so privileged to remove your kids out of school. And it gets away from actually the heart of the conversation, which is how can we like undo adult supremacy and create a life of collective liberation and more justice for everybody, right? I'm more interested in talking about school solidarity, like how can we work to be in more solidarity across all these intersection issues. If the goal is to undo empire's hold on us, to truly like have collective liberation, then we have to think about autonomy away. And when autonomy, the way that I think of autonomy, I know that autonomy is one of these words that can get really liberalized fast, but the way I think about it is like autonomy from the state, right? Autonomy from the institutions, autonomy from capitalism, and then autonomy for our community and for each other.
Thanks for getting into the difference between youth autonomy and youth liberation in your view too. One of my next questions was if you could talk about some of the ways that trusting kids is a way of solidarity and not just providing co-mentorship and stuff, and kind of that difference, because I feel like that can get marginalized. That can get kind of put into a binary too. Like, well, I'm going to trust a kid by being a mentor, kind of like what you were saying about the thistle, on how some people were trying to come in and do workshops, and maybe some examples of how you see that not work in ways it can work.
Are you maybe getting to like power? Like responsibility of power?
Yeah, let me give one more example that I left out. Is one thing that you are part of the podcast Grounded Futures with your kid Liam, and Liam always talks about like it's okay to have guidance as well. It's not just like a kid on their own and adults are just, watching them be free and trusted. So I guess kind of that nuance of like what true solidarity looks like and how that can kind of be confused with being a mentor as well. But also there is the need for guidance for kids.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. And it gets into this idea of neglect, and Liam is he's been my kid who's just really always brought it right down to like the core point. I just like appreciate him so much. Oh my God. Because like I would, occasionally I would be like, oh, through being in solidarity and listening to my kids, like, is there a fine line to neglecting them, like from becoming their best selves or something? And Liam's like, no, like the parent who forces their kid to all the things is literally neglecting them, like literally neglecting their souls, like not listening at all, because they've heard that kids need to be in six different things to become the adult they're meant to be or whatever. And I was always like so grateful for him. Yeah. And it's why I am not big on, and I very rarely, if ever, a supporter of parenting books and parenting advice, and Trust Kids is definitely none of those, because as Liam always points out, it's not going to work, because it's the opposite of listening to and being emergent with your child and being in solidarity with them at the moment they're in. And sometimes that means truly, like, this is just an anarchist ethos of meeting somebody where they find themselves or where they're at, right? And so sometimes that means doing a whole lot for that kid. Like, it can look like beyond mentorship. Like you're actually doing tons for them. And from the outside, it can look like you're this controlling A-type parent, but really you're listening to a kid that maybe has anxiety disorder or is autistic or whatever, right? And yeah, and like that, like one of the things that emerges a lot in youth liberation circles or alternative schooling circles is an entrenchment of individualism. And this is another reason why I like to move to autonomy and solidarity as the ethos around this work instead of liberation. But I think just moving away from that is because, it's like, I read this really good Bell Hooks quote the other day about the difference between equality and reciprocity. And so like, I'm really interested in like, it's not about trying to get equality, it's about reciprocity and about justice. So that means listening, that means showing up and being in solidarity across difference, and mentorship flows in all different directions. But more than all, and then all of this aside is that, I've been around, I'm as somebody who's older than my kids, quite a bit older. I have some experience. I have some things to share. And there's a time and place for me to show up in that way, in a really solid way. The solid part of solidarity is just be solid. I don't know if I answered it. It's always changing for me. It's relational. It's like drug militancy really is all that this is in that book, right? It's relational. Mm-hmm. It's back to that word responsibility. Like, how do I respond? That's based on trust is that it's just always responsive, being responsive versus having a guidebook or a handbook or a parenting how-to in front of me and checking off things. Instead, I'm like looking and listening and hearing and then responding.
Awesome. Yeah, the reciprocity that you're talking about through that is so key. So thank you. That was a really good answer. My next question was, there's a lot of talk of throwing around the term abolishing the family. And I wanted to ask you about, I don't know, just kind of the discussion of trusting kids. Like you say, solidarity begins at home. And this nuance between abolishing the family or denuclearizing the family.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Oh, yeah. I really don't like abolish family. I'm not on social media anymore, so I don't pipe in like I did. But anytime I would see the list of all the different abolishing and I would have family, I would always pipe in and say, I think you mean denuclearize the family. I think could you please just step back and really think about that for a second? Are you kidding? We need more kinship. We need to actually expand it, what we mean by family, and reclaim it. I also think that there's a lot of whiteness and a lot of colonialism in that statement of abolishing family. Most of my friends who are Indigenous, people of color, particularly with Latino roots, like the familia is everything, and it's expansive. It's not the nuclear family. And it stretches beyond bloodlines even. And I know that a lot of it comes from, it's like queering the family, queering kinship, which is really important. I'm really grateful to decades and decades of the LGBTQ plus queer communities who have expanded what it means to build kin. Like, I'm so deeply grateful, because I think that there's an intervention into whiteness that happens at that one that's really important to highlight. And the oppression of children still happens in those homes because it's not brought into the fore as an intersection. And I think that's why there's an anti-authoritarian or an anarchist view of abolishing families, because there's a belief that it's just inherently patriarchal, inherently hierarchical, but it's not. If we stretch back, please read Toby Rollo's essay in Trust Kids. If you stretch back to that, families were not hierarchical. Or even, Sylvia Federici touches on this really beautifully in her weavings of the past, that the subjugation of women through the patriarchal family and then the subjugation of children is all part of capitalism. It's all part of the plan. But sorry, Marxist, it actually predates capitalism. It's actually a colonial idea. And it's very actually ahistorical to just root it into capitalism. So it's very much this idea of a family being inherently patriarchal, heteropatriarchy and hierarchical is flawed. Is it happening? Yes. and it's located in what's called the nuclear family. And that part is really important. And it keeps whiteness really strong. It keeps colonialism really strong, and it's about capitalism as well. So yeah, I'm somebody who promotes and talks more about denuclearizing the family and creating larger webs of what it means to be in family and in kinship. And, I'm with Donna Haraway, like making kin is the most important thing that we have to do right now. And that includes across all species. It includes like fungi and more than humans and trees. And speaking about mentorship, I mean, most of the guidance and mentorship I receive is from, the fungi and then the mycelium in the trees about cooperation and mutuality, right? So, I want to make kin with even more kin, more family across bloodlines.
Yeah, that reminds me of what your kid Zach always says when he sees fungi. He says like, "What's up, ancestors?" So yeah, definitely expanding what family and kin is to the non-human more than human.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's cool you said that, because this leads to my next question. Is a chapter you co-wrote with Zach called Magneto's Dreams. And I love this chapter, and I love the art in there too by Gadzooks Bazooka. And you have this nuance of Professor X and Magneto. And what I really like about this essay is it's not mean to Professor X either. It's you all talk about how he provides shelter, he saves lives, he provides trust. But this goal of his is assimilation, and is to work for the state and to kind of bring back the status quo. And one quote I really liked on what you all said about Magneto is you say, quote, "Magneto supports dissidents and gives them space to exist freely outside the stratification of the state, prefiguring a liberated now." So I was just wondering if you could talk more about that quote and kind of this chapter. I think it's a really just creative and genius chapter and take on the whole book too. And I love that it's at the end of the book.
Thank you so much. I just want to go on record to say, if you read Trust Goods, you'll read it in my acknowledgments. But Chris was really, really important for this book coming together, because you showed up at a really important time, and with a lot of joy and excitement, enthusiasm and knowledge and an understanding of what I was trying to say and do. And you really helped. And I really want to thank you. And your essay is so, so good. And so thank you so much. And I really wanted to, I'm worried we're going to get this call, and I didn't get to say that. And including nothing's done in silo, like nothing. And I have been this person in smaller ways than Chris was for me. But like when you put a book together like this, especially something that involves a lot of people's voices and a lot of vulnerability on the line, and then like all the people who aren't in the book, all the conversations, all the music, all the songs, all the movies and TV shows, and like all the books and people's work that influence the smallest conversations that watered seeds that made this book grow, then you're like sitting alone with it. And it's this bizarre thing. And so it's really important to have friends like Chris was to me, that he was somebody I could text and say, "I really want to put it in this order. What do you think?" And just having that, I think it doesn't get talked about enough. And I know that most people who write have Chris's in their life, or like, and I've been that person for other people. So I just really wanted to thank you publicly for everything you did for this book. And sometimes I think your name should be on it. You helped so much. So thank you.
No, thank you. And it was an honor to be a part of the book and help out. And I had a lot of fun and learned so much. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Yeah. So connected to that. So X-Men. And I, Liam, who his full name is Uliam, has an essay in the book. He did a solo essay. And then my partner, Chris, did some art in it. And so I was trying to figure out how, the reason why, like I said, like having Zach was what got me on this path and opened up my world in such massive ways. I can't even begin to talk about it, in a way that captures what he's done for me and continues. So I was coming up to the end of the book, of finishing it and sending it in. And I asked him if he would co-write a piece about Magneto. He isn't actually an X-Men fan. He doesn't know, he read the comics a bit as a kid. And because I had lupus when he was young, I used to always call myself an X-Men, that I was mutated. I have I'm actually a powerful person with my lupus. And we had a fun little joke going about that I was that. And we just nerd out about that stuff. And we're both really into Nietzsche and other philosophies that kind of intersect with these ideas. And so he's like, sure, okay, let's do it. So I just wanted to say that. And that's why it was done around that. But also, I went off on a whole tangent about you helping with the book that I forgot your question about like the quote that you wanted me to.
Oh, yeah. No, so yeah, I was talking about this nuance between Professor X, like providing trust, but his goal is a simulation. And then you all had said that Magneto supports dissidents and gives them space to exist freely outside the stratification of the state, prefiguring a liberated now. And in your time at the Thistle too, and the metaphor of the helmet and how Magneto had the helmet to protect himself, but you can use that to protect others. And just so many good metaphors in this.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize to true X-Men fans and of Magneto fans if we went way off. But I know it's pretty common for anarchists particularly to have an affinity with Magneto in the shows and in the books. So I think it wasn't too big of a stretch. But yeah, I personally, like, there was a time when I was working with the youth and they would call me Professor X, and I really liked that. And then it wasn't until one of the newer movies came out where the writers went back to kind of the origins of Magneto and his army and of misfits, and how he was really upset with the assimilation stuff, that Liam again said, no way, you're Magneto, you're all Magneto. And so I got deeper into like the nerd verse of who Magneto really maybe was meant to be and the potential that was cut off. And even Stan Lee himself knew that he wasn't a bad guy. Like he didn't mean for that to happen. And that was, whatever. Marvel movies did that and other writers. But I just really like the idea of, I think it's like it's a timing thing. Like we've seen this big opening around neurodifference, around people, about the celebration of us, that like we don't all have to be medicated and assimilated into being this ideal person, this ideal youth, this ideal whatever professional, that we can like step back and kind of deprofessionalize how we view, how we show up together in community. And Magneto as a symbol for that shows that, like, yeah, it's not easy having this difference, but we can work with it together, and you can be your full, beautiful, different self in community. You have a role, you have something to offer. And one of the things we nuance in the book is that, like, yeah, Professor X they trust, and they finally an adult saying you're not broken, how important that is for someone who maybe has come from huge trauma, but also like, let's use Rogue, for example. When I touch somebody, they die. Like, I actually am broken, like in my soul. Like, I need some help. I need to not just be put into a uniform and become an elite member to go fight for the state. Like, I actually need some care and love and support. So, like, there's nuance there. I don't mean to just leave people alone in there, but also, like, and I think it's just really connected to adult supremacy and how adults can show up. And yeah, and the helmet was the goal of the book or that essay is that we deal with it, adult supremacy, to the point where all adults can take their helmet off who are doing the work. Because like I have to wear my helmet because people are constantly trying to tell me that I'm messing my kids up by raising them the way I do. Right.
Oh, thank you for that. That was awesome. Thanks for breaking it open. My next question was kind of on intergenerational solidarity, and it also ties into Emma Talks, the program that you had put together with some others. And you talk about this patriarchal carelessness and how many events and talks do a horrible job, and that's why many women don't agree to do certain talks, and how you had some success with Emma Talks. And you also had Helen Hughes in Radiant Voices, and it was in Trust Kids, this interview with Helen, and she was part of the Listening House, and she talked about listening and voice. And yeah, I kind of just that really showed a lot of intergenerational solidarity. That talk is really comforting to read. And then also just how that curtails into patriarchy too, and Emma Talks. If you could just talk about those those two kind of how they dovetail together.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a few things there. When I started community organizing around creating multimedia works, I right away was like, how do I really bring in youth and children and, quote unquote, emerging, or I think we're always emerging, everybody, but, or, new writers with, longer term, well-seasoned, well-known writers in a way that's not tokenistic. And how do I do this in a way that feels generative and pushes against the patriarchal and other gatekeepers around how we share media and talks and our ideas? So I started with a magazine project. And one of the ways is it's the way it's done. So I had youth do the magazine with me. Right. And so right away, that's going to disrupt a level of tokenism. And there was older people on part of the collective as well. I think from the first issue, I had Matt's kid, Daisy, who was 10 at the time, write a piece called Daisy's Rant next to a piece from Noam Chomsky. So even layout's really important. And that was really important. And that, Daisy was a good, had a voice was just as important, if maybe not even more important in lots of ways, to Noam Chomsky's. So yeah, and then whatever. And then so years go on. And then a lot of the times I create things because I face barriers personally. I have speech apraxia. I have a learning disability. Writing is really hard for me. Speaking publicly was I couldn't even talk in front of a room of 6 people. So being in collectives was really hard for me always because I didn't like the tyranny of the round. I would just die. I'm somebody who would never have given a TED talk. I was asked to do one of those smaller TED talks. I was like, no way. And so I was like, what? So I'm always interested in the conditions. And we talk about this as anarchists a lot, right? If the conditions are such, things will flow, right? And so Emma Talks was like, what would work for me to do a talk? And I still didn't do one then. I wasn't even the MC. I never, ever stood on that stage at Emma Talks or talked into the mic because I wasn't there yet. And so one of the things was, Emma stands for Engaging Monologues, Mutual Aid. So monologues, the person on the stage has the first word and the last word. There is no Q&A. They get to just tell their story. And we created beautiful videos that go with it that are accessible, that have closed captioning and everything. And so if you're in the room, you got to experience the beauty of the evening. And part of this was I did with Corn Brown, and she was the director of that part. And she trained young women and gender nonconforming folks on camera. And there's 4 cameras going and really highly produced videos. So it was also part of the mutual aid was to give these speakers something that they could have to share with the world. We also did the people who came the night of, they donated to whoever the speaker wanted to donate to, whatever cause or organization. Yeah. And so, because we have all been to the talks where we know who lines up first at the mic. Primarily it's cis white men or men, often not with thoughtful questions, often just to show that they know they want to say what they are thinking about the topic or adding to the topic. And what it did, the feedback I got was it gave a lot of the speakers the space to go a different route with their work because they knew they weren't going to get interrupted. They knew they were going to they could be vulnerable. I don't really want to name names, but one of them said they usually wouldn't do the talk that they did because they are always so emotional after it's about their child and they cry and they have to go to the green room after and just be alone or be with their people. But if they had to do a Q&A after, forget about it. So they wouldn't ever do that talk. So that's an example of how it broke that open. I feel like you added an add-on, but...
Oh yeah, just the other part was
Helen
Hughes and intergenerational solidarity.
So it's giving a platform or space for women, for folks who maybe don't always get the space to talk. So that's one side of it. But the other part was listening, creating space for listening in this really cool, different way. And I learned a lot about how to truly listen to young people from Helen. She was one of my main mentors. She was the founder of Windsor House, a publicly funded democratic free school that ran for 48 years or something in Vancouver. Really important for because it disrupted capitalist models because it was free as part of the system. And she just really listens in a way that's profound. And I think like it was interesting, like the feedback from cis men who came to Emma Talks was like, wow, you created a space where like I had to really get uncomfortable with the fact that I wasn't going to be talking. Like I had to like just listen. I know, but I liked it. I liked the feedback. I guess the thing with Radiant Voices and why that book happened as an outgrowth of Emma Talks is the publisher actually asked me if she could do a book based on the Emma Talks. And I thought that was really kind, but like, I really care about who has access, who gets to tell stories. So I wanted to invite other folks in who would never stand up on the stage. Right. So we did weave in 8 of the Emma Talks into that book, but then I asked 12 new folks to participate in the book. And one of them was Helen. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And I really love one of her quotes in the interview you did with Helen, where she says, move toward the trouble. It rarely goes away on its own. And that's really, really
yeah.
deep. Yeah.
We had that. That's beautiful. Yeah. Matt had that. That was also a thing at the Thistle, like go towards the trouble. Or Clee Benelli has a term, he calls it the anti-retreat. And it was, he first spoke of that at a social spaces summit that he came to from his space that he runs and ran, had a lot to do with youth, Indigenous youth and media production. And yeah, if something came up, a conflict came up on the collective, or like instead of retreating from each other, they called it the anti-retreat. Like you actually go towards the trouble. You don't retreat from it. So I really love that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So the documentary Common Notions is so powerful. I was wondering if you could talk about, you've already kind of talked about this documentary a little bit, but maybe the documentary and the trip that you all took to Mexico and the interviews that you all had with Gustavo Estiva. I want to say rest in peace to, you actually dedicate Trust Kids to Gustavo. His interviews were so deep, and it seemed the spirit of collectivity and real community were huge themes there. And I just wanted to give a little space for you to talk about that trip, talk about Gustavo, and really just how he really highlights friendship throughout those interviews. And
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm so sad that he passed this year. That was the first time I met him when we went there in 2012. And I made that film with Corin Brown, who I did Emma Talks with. And a bunch of the youth from the collective came from the Thistle. We got to spend time at his home, and he shared all his thinking and ideas with us. A lot of them are rooted in Yvonne Illich's ideas. He challenges me. He continues to challenge me. He could always notice the one word that would undermine my whole statement. So I often sent him work. I really, really miss him. Like if I said, I think in like Making Kin, the pamphlet I did, I think at the beginning I say systems of care or something. And he messaged me and said, I think you mean webs of care. Why would you want a system? Like I don't know. I mean, maybe you come a bit close to that, Chris, but like, I don't have anyone else in my life. Nick a little bit too, but like nothing like Gustavo. And he did it with such delight and conviviality and friendship at the heart of it. Like it was never felt harsh. It always felt deeply, deeply care-centered and friendship-centered. It's embodiment of like, Carla, like I know you mean something else, and I'm going to help you in this moment. So I really, one of the last things we did together was he co-wrote an essay in Trust Kids with his 2 friends, Madhu and Dana. It's so good. They wrote one of my favorite papers of all time about liberating from pedagogy, and a very anti-pedagogy piece, which is I'm in line with them, and deprofessionalism and all that stuff. But I asked them for their bios, and Madhu sent this really flowery, fun, playful bio. She's a philosopher of education at Penn State University and has co-written a few books. And she just sent a really playful, joyful bio. And Gustavo got back and said, "Oh my God, Carla, you need to change my bio. It needs to be more playful." And I was like, "Okay, well, here's mine." And we all did really playful bios together. And Dana got in there, and the four of us had this really uplifting, joyful, playful encounter for Trust Kids. And it was like the last emails I had with him. So, I mean, I'm so grateful and just heartbroken, but I feel like I didn't answer any questions. I'm really grateful for the space to talk about him. A really big memory, of course, is that you and I got to have a Zoom session with him about some work we're doing together that hopefully we'll put out. And because he just dropped so many incredible ideas and information for us both to live with and be with. So I'm grateful for that. I miss him. He would have really understood what the book is doing and what it was about. Yeah. I don't know that the movie would have been nothing without him. Like, just to come back to Common Notion, like literally that film he was so integral. And the reason why we went there, I need to say, is that both Matt Hearn and Richard Day, who we are interviewed for the movie earlier on, both said in our interviews, you need to go to Mexico and talk to Gustavo. So it was like within the making of the movie that trip happened.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing those stories, and thanks for letting me be part of talking to Gustavo too. That was an honor. And kind of what you were saying about how he gives you those suggestions reminds me of that radical honesty that Bill Hooks always talked about too, just like, or critique as a way of love. But just different ways of just interacting in a kind way.
Yeah, I feel like Bill would have been that friend too, that would have sent the, like, you don't mean to use that word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is my last question. And basically this question is about sci-fi and you, your influences. I see Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler is present. They're present in all your work you do. And also was wondering about your future explorations in writing fiction and sci-fi. And you have a new essay coming out, or story coming out, on Baba Yaga. That's already out in a zine by Danny. So I was just wondering if you could kind of talk about on some of these ruminations of sci-fi and you and your exploring writing fiction and sci-fi.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I don't get asked this very often. That's really nice. Yeah, I mean, every time I visit Ursula Le Guin, whether it's rereading The Dispossessed, or I just finished Always Coming Home, I'm just blown away with how many, I'm going to use your phrase, watered the seeds she watered by reading her work. Like, it's all there. It's just, I'm like, wow, that had more of an impact than probably any nonfiction book I ever read. I also think she was so experimental and not afraid to bring in different worlds and make worlds that, like, I guess, like, at the term, I think I was like, she's such an incredible time binder. Like, she was so good at thinking through time. She must be a time traveler. I don't know. At least these just plugged in or something. So yeah, she's really, really important. And then Octavia Butler, in a different way, influences the way I am or think about the world or want to write, and many other writers too, but like definitely Le Guin. Like, yeah, I don't even know. I feel like, I know it was her birthday yesterday. I was like, oh my gosh. And like Orwell too. I want to give a shout out to Orwell because I think because Orwell started writing in nonfiction and writing about the world and then moved to fiction. Like, I actually feel akin to him. Like, not that I'm like him or do what he did, but that I understand this desire to be like, oh, I got to just move to fiction because, and maybe Ursula and Octavia were just smarter and knew, like, this is the way you can impact people in a deeper way, longer than writing your rant in a journal or something. But the freedom that comes with writing fiction is just, there's just nothing like it. And I know you've dabbled in fiction, and you do. I would say your songwriting does it too. So maybe you can speak to this better than I can because I'm just starting. But there was like a freedom in my voice of like the true me of what I want to say when I write fiction, that it's maybe connected more to the ether of ideas of the times. That's what I think I mean by time traveler, like the connecting to all the ideas that are floating around. And I'm really excited about, I'm working on a couple stories, and they're not one genre. Like that's the other thing too, is like I needed people who could bust through the gatekeepers a bit. And we're seeing more and more of that, but I'm really interested in like creative nonfiction, but also like mixing that with fantasy and some magical realism, and sort of blending them or busting them up, doing both at once. So I'm trying to do that. And it's hard because gatekeepers are that's a real thing. Yeah, I have been working on one, and I did talk to one of my publisher friends, and they were like, I just don't even know. I don't know how to pitch this because I don't know what genre it is. Like, oh no, so I'll just have to publish it myself. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd like to hear from you, because you seem to, you have I think more experience than me. Why you go into that world in fantasy and
I guess there's like a freedom in fictionalizing things, but there's also, it breaks a binary that nonfiction gets stuck in. Like there's an institutional kind of thing in your back, and when you write nonfiction, like, oh, this Western thought of gotta have citations, need to be rooted in truth, needs to be verifiable, and those are lies of nonfiction, but they can get stuck inside of you. And when you write fiction, your nonfiction is still there. Like your story's there, your friendships, it's still autobiographical. So I think fiction breaks down some of these dimensions, but it lets the truth creep in too. So it's kind of it's a magic. You find that in your writing, which I like.
Mm-hmm. That's really well said. Thank you. Yeah.
Things I never thought about. Thanks for asking.
But it's true. Like I was trying to think of when I write nonfiction, I have all the critics in my head, and it's the institutionalization. It's the lie of Western thought being there, and the linear time, and that they're what's the word, teleological, that that things run in a linear way, whereas when you get into fiction, you get to really disrupt all those ways. That's what I find in songwriting. I can describe a vibe or a thing, and it's like many different people or many different situations, and you do that well. It's amazing.
Thank you. Well, thank you for doing this wonderful interview.
That was fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Time Talks podcast. I want to thank my friend Carla for taking some time to speak with me. Please pick up Carla's newest book, Trust Kids. It's amazing. Thanks to everyone who shares the show around. Thanks to Awareness for the music. And as Lonnie Pops Lynn always said, keep the peace.